Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. The feeling of getting stronger is one of the most important things to get right in role-playing games or just games in general. A strong sense of character progression can be done in multiple ways, but it can also be hampered or even completely ruined by some other design decisions. The most common way of creating the sense of progression is implementing character levels obviously, but this won't guarantee you a good character progression if other systems in the game don't support it. It's really easy to see your experience go up until you hit the next level, but how that affects the gameplay is a different story. The player usually expects that with each level his character will get at least slightly stronger no matter which playstyle he's going for. Increasing stats like strength, agility or something similar, unlocking more abilities and being able to equip stronger gear are features which are usually directly connected with the leveling system. But in order for this to actually matter, there should be a sense of danger in the world. The difficulty of the game is important, but this is not what I'm referring to. The player should feel some dose of fear while exploring the world, especially in the beginning of the game when even some critters could kill you in a few hits. Those same critters, small animals or whatever it is, should not provide you with any challenge once you progress your character a little bit. These are usually your first steps when it comes to character progression in RPGs. But this doesn't mean that the sense of danger should not continue to be present in the world, quite the opposite actually. It's one of the most important things that give you a purpose to progress your character, so it should be present throughout the whole game, but it can also be really frustrating if not done properly. Not to mention less accessible to wider audience, especially if the early game is really punishing. In my opinion, the early game in RPGs is really important for a few reasons. Introducing the player to the world and its rules can't be properly done with any hand-holding tutorial. I'm not saying that I'm against tutorials, but in order to actually get a sense of how the world works, the player should be encouraged to find out by himself. Even if that means that you're going to fail quite a bit until you learn how to overcome some of these obstacles. The sense of progression is far more rewarding if you struggle a lot in the early game. All of this is tied to player progression and the feel that you're actually doing something meaningful for your character. I think the world should establish some strict rules right from the beginning and the player could learn to play by those rules or try to find loopholes. Speaking about loopholes, they are also really important in my opinion, but they should be well hidden in the game. However, a lot of people would probably see this as bad balancing, but I couldn't disagree more. I'm not speaking about exploits and unintended ways of experiencing the game. One example that's on top of my mind is from Gothic 2. The early game can be really tough, especially if you don't pick your fights, and you would have to get stronger and get some better gear before you even try to fight a couple of beasts outside Corinus. However, there are a couple of expensive scrolls that you can buy from one merchant who is slightly hidden. With these scrolls you can turn into a strong monster for some time and kill those beasts quite easily, and I don't think this is bad balancing. These scrolls are sold by a hidden merchant, they cost a lot of gold and the player probably doesn't even know how strong they actually are if he didn't play the game before. But still it's there as an option. Maybe later in the game, once you get your hands on the same scrolls, you realize, damn, this could come in handy earlier. Those are the loopholes I was referring to. I mentioned there should be defined rules in the world when I started to talk about loopholes. This makes the world feel alive and you'll get a feeling like you're just another person trying to do your own thing. Even if from the narrative perspective you play as some sort of hero, that should not mean that the world and everything else in it should revolve around you. Without the rules, the world in these games are usually revolved around the player and this can highly affect the character progression. One system that works completely contradictory to leveling and character progression in general is scaling. I recently did a separate video where I just talked about scaling in games, but I'll only briefly mention it here because I think this is really important. Scaling is not fundamentally bad, not at all, but it's usually implemented as a one-dimensional system. For example, if everything in the world is trying to keep up with your level, like in some Elder Scrolls games, that makes your leveling process almost completely irrelevant. It becomes really hard to feel like you made any kind of progress with your character if this is the case, even though you get more abilities and shinier gear as you play. But like I said, scaling is not fundamentally bad. This system has the potential to be really good if implemented where it makes sense. When your character is really high level, the game could upscale the level of some NPCs that are always supposed to be tough. But this system usually affects a large majority of NPCs, which is the core of the problem. If game developers could manage to make some selective scaling systems, that could fix a lot of the problems. I still prefer unleveled worlds in RPGs, even though there are flaws in that system as well. But yeah, scaling in its current state is always a threat to character progression. The reason for its existence was to try and keep the games challenging throughout the whole playthrough, but also because of balancing. And this brings us to another major problem I have with modern game design. Balancing definitely has its place in RPGs, but it seems like everyone became obsessed with ultra balancing their games. In MMORPGs, balancing is one of the most important aspects, especially in PvP, but in single player RPGs it's really not that important. To put it simply, I don't think that every playstyle in the game should be equally effective, but everything should have its uses in particular situations. I also believe that players have to be able to make bad builds in RPGs, because if everything is equally effective, you never stop and think, was this a good idea? Unbalanced playstyle is not the same as less effective playstyle if less effective playstyle is still viable in the game. Especially if that less effective playstyle is really good in certain situations, but not so good in general. That really sounds like it makes sense in my head at least. The only true problem I have with balancing issues is becoming overpowered really quickly. I think it's totally fine if you become overpowered after many hours, if you can still find some challenging things to fight in the game. But it's especially rewarding to feel a lot of power after you struggled quite a bit in the beginning. Another feature that can get in the way of making a good character progression is the narrative. This is one of the reasons why people are getting tired of games with you as a hero story.
Dragonborn. It's an honor.
It's certainly easier to make marketing campaigns with a hero team, but that can put a lot of limitations on the gameplay. Starting the game as nobody or just a common person who is living his life is much more appealing to me from the gameplay perspective. And from the role-playing perspective. Yeah. Of course, this doesn't mean you should not be able to become important in the game, whether through the main quest or in some other way, but building your character from the ground up really affects that feel of progression. This is one of the reasons why mods like Alternate Start or Skyrim Unbound are so popular among Skyrim's community. Rather than being a godlike hero, a lot of people decide to just start as a farmer, landlord, or a simple thief. Of course, this can be subjective from the narrative point of view, you might not prefer this, but it's possible to play as a hero and not get special treatments around every corner. Having a predetermined character with defined backstory is fine, but this will always put some limits on the gameplay. I like games for what they are, but in many situations I can't help but wonder what if. What if we could make our own character in The Witcher, for example, and start building him from the ground up? Just imagine that for a second. Maybe you start as a young Witcher who wants to prove himself by going and doing monster contracts, or you even don't start as a Witcher at all, but you still have the option to become one if you survive that trial of grasses. This universe has an amazing potential for a similar game, and now that Geralt's story is pretty much over, I really hope we can get something like this. I got carried away a little bit, but this is still related to the character progression in a way which I think The Witcher 3 lacked. Anyway, I'm thinking of doing multiple parts about this discussion because there is a lot to talk about, but that should be it for today. Tell me your opinions in the comments below, and if you liked the video, press the thumbs up button. If you loved it, subscribe to the channel for more similar content. You could also press the bell icon so you don't miss any future upload. I'm all about RPGs and I have a couple of weekly uploads. Special thanks to my patrons and YouTube exclusive members, and if you as well want to become one of them, all the links are in the description. I'll see ya in the next one.